Would you like to know how to keep things fresh in your pantry? You could learn from Yosef HaTzadik, but more importantly, you could learn from how he kept things fresh, how we should invest properly in our Torah learning and our observance of Yiddishkeit. In Heilige Tzedra, wird erzählt, wie Yosef hat zusammengeklebt mit dem Eichel in der Sheva Shnei HaSova. In our parasha, it tells us how Yosef collected all of this food during the 7 years of plenty in preparation of the famine that was going to come. And the Pasuk tells us this, Vaytan Eichel be'orim, he put food into the cities. Eichel sedei ha'ir asher svivaiseh nasan b'seicha, that he took the food from the fields around the city, put it into the city. Sounds like the Torah is giving us more information than we need. So the question is, what is the Torah adding by telling us that he took the food from the fields around the city and put it into the city? How does that add to what we already know, that he put food in the cities, stored food in the cities? When the Torah tells us that he put food into the cities, you can understand as surely, logically, if he is putting food to store into the cities, he must have taken that food, that produce from the closest fields. It's just logical. Why would anybody think to schlep food from fields that are close to certain cities to other cities that the Torah has to tell you, no, he didn't do that, he kept it at the close cities? It just doesn't make sense. And let's say that for whatever reason, a person would never have worked this out on their own. You wouldn't have realized, you're going to take the food of the closest field to the closest city. Even then it wouldn't make sense. Why would the Torah have to tell us this? What practical difference is there for us to know how he stored the food? Really, the point of the story is that he stored the food. So in Medrash State of them, Medrash Bereshis Rabbi gives two opinions about what that means. The first opinion of the Tanna Kama is that what Yosef did is he kept food in the same territory that it was produced, because each place kind of sustains its produce. Then Nechemia says, no, he actually did more than that, or did differently to that. He put dust and ashes, or earth and ashes, together with the produce, because that's what keeps the produce fresh. Thus says, in other words, like Beta Deus, whichever opinion you go with, the words, the additional words that he took the food of the fields and put it into the adjacent cities, that's there to erzählen, wie Yosef hat bewohnt, dass die Tfuhr soll sich halten, nicht verfehlt werden. It's ready to tell us how that he ensured that the produce would remain fresh and not be spoiled. The Chelek b'neihem is, it's just that there are two different opinions about how he did that. They all agree that that's what he was trying to do. The first opinion is, how do you keep the produce fresh? Keep it in the same proximity of the fields in which it grew in the first place. Because each place establishes, or sustains its produce. So if you're in the place where the produce grew, then that produce is going to stay fresh. Whereas according to Rabbi Nechemia, that he did the same thing, he kept the produce fresh, but except he used a different method, which was to take some of the earth and ashes, put it with the produce, and that kept it fresh. The Mefarshei HaMedrash explain, as Rabbi Nechemia learned us from the Verta Sode Nosan, that Rabbi Nechemia reads in the pasuk that it says he placed the field as nosan echepes from the sada asher svivaiseh, meaning that he took some of the field and he placed it with the food when he put the food into the storehouses. Which means he took some of the earth, some of the ash from that area. Okay, so those are the two opinions in the Medrash. Rashi seems to blend them. Rashi commenting on this pasuk, he quotes those words that Yosef took the food from the fields and put them into the close by cities on his Mefarish, and this is how he explains it. Each area sustains its produce. Plus, you also take some of the earth from that place, you put it together with the produce, and it prevents the produce from spoiling. So it would appear that Rashi is addressing the question we asked, which is, why do I need to know this information? So, Why do I have to know that they did this at all? And zweitens, and if it's because the Torah is saying that Yosef wanted to avoid unnecessary schlepping, again, why does the Torah have to tell us this? So Rashi says, I'll tell you why, because it's different methods that we use in order to preserve the produce. Thing is, Rashi, unlike the Medrash that presented it as two different opinions, puts it all into one explanation, with a conjunction, with an and in the middle. That each area of land produces or sustains its produce. And plus, in addition to that, you also add some of the earth and it helps to preserve the produce. It doesn't use any expression that would imply that they're two different opinions, as the Medrash did. It's more than that implies, as like Rashi, Rashi's take is that the pasuk wants us to know that they did both things together. In order to preserve the produce, Rashi says that Yosef kept it close to where it grew. And that wasn't good enough, but he also put some of the earth from that place into the space in order to preserve it. In other words, Rashi is doing something unusual. He's taking what the Medrash presented as two contrary opinions, and he's putting them as a singular opinion. How does Rashi get to that conclusion? So, the Mefarshim will say, as that Rashi is illustrating to us that even in the Medrash, Rabbi Nechemia was not arguing with the first opinion. No, as Moisif Efteresh today, he was just adding further information to what the first opinion said. Rashi is explaining that the Medrash wanted us to know that Rabbi Nechemia is saying, I agree with you that you've got to keep produce in the land where it grew because that's good for it. And I'm telling you, beyond that, if you want to prevent it from spoiling, you also have to take some of that sand and put it into the actual produce itself. But even if you accept that opinion of the Mefarshim, there's still something that's unclear over here. We know that Rashi's interpretation is always looking at the simplest understanding of the pasuk. Especially here, but Rashi is not alluding to the fact that this is midrashic by saying that the Chachamim taught this particular perspective. And it's in Matzayna as the Pirish is from Pirish's Rabbi, and he doesn't say that this is from the Medrash. So look at the pasuk and tell me where in the simple understanding of this story is there any compulsion that it has to be that it took two different steps in order to preserve the produce. So the Mefarshim say, well, it's alluded to in the pasuk because it says Oichel sedei ha'ir nosan. He took the food, the produce from the fields around the cities, and he placed them in the cities. That tells us that he put the food into the cities. And then the fact that the Torah said that it's the food of the fields that he put there, that implies that he not only put the produce in the proximity to the field, but he put some of the earth from the field into the produce as well. So even though the Mefarshim say this, it's very difficult to imagine that is the simple understanding of the pasuk. In pasuk steht doch ein mol nosen. The pasuk only says he gave the food or placed the food once. He says das hefech pshutisch amiket teitchen as das fängt zwei verschiedene Sinnes in besondere Erte. So it goes exactly against the simple understanding of the pasuk to say that it's two different placings. One that he placed the food in that environment, and the other that he placed the earth in the food. That's not pshat to say that the pasuk over here was implying two completely different processes with one word nasan. So therefore we have to come back to our question, where does Rashi read in this pasuk, according to pshat, that there are two steps required in order to preserve the produce? Perhaps he has another suggestion. As Rashi made nicht zu sagen, als Nossen Besucher meint der zweite Nesina sie auf Beatwur. Not like the Mefarshim want to suggest that Nossen Besucher is a second action that Yosef did in order to preserve the food by putting the offer into the crops. That the taish von Eichel Sadeh is, rather what it means is when it says Eichel Sadeh, the food of the fields, it means Yosef hat dem Eichel zusammen mitten Sadeh, dem Afar Hasadeh eingegeben beseichel. It means that Yosef took the food and the earth that came with it, and he put that into the storehouses in the city. Now that makes sense. So it's Eichel plus Sadeh that you put into the storehouse. In the mir, in the city. Which automatically implies that not only did he keep the produce in the same place, but he took some of the field, i.e. the earth, with it. But what isn't clear, what is necessary, what pushes us from the perspective of learning the pshat, as says, how do I know that putting where do I see clearly in the pasuk that putting the produce in the proximity to the field where it grew is intended to preserve it? Where do I see that? So to understand this, we're going to identify three ways in which Rashi speaks differently to the Medrash, or speaks specifically, and that includes saying things differently to the Medrash. Number one, Aleph. By initially, when Rashi is talking about the value of keeping produce in the area where it grew, he says, because it makes the peiros sustainable. But after that, when Rashi speaks about putting some of the offer, some of the earth into the produce, he no longer calls it peiros. Sorry, we're going to get to peiros in a second. Here he doesn't say, he says that it prevents it from spoiling, not just that it sustains it, prevents it from spoiling. If you think about it, logically you should have switched that around. If Rashi has to explain that the word mamid means stops it from rotting, he should have said that the first time he referred to what Yosef is doing here, preserving the produce. Why does he first speak generically that it's to sustain the produce and then get into the detail that it's to prevent it from rotting? Number two, base. The Medrash said that you've got to take some of the earth and some ashes and mix it with the produce in order to sustain it. Rashi emphasizes not just offer, but specifically it has to be soil that comes from that place. So says, it's not genug stam offer or the kitmius. It's not useful just to take random soil or random ash and mix it together with the produce. Now it's musan and offer from the mord wo die Tvur is gewachsen. It has to be soil that comes from where the plant grew. Why is that relevant? And lastly, Gimel Rashi this is what I was saying mistakenly before, that what happens, Rashi first talks about that the earth keeps or sustains peiros. And then after that he says, and when you add earth, it keeps the tvur, the produce, rather than the peiros, which is quite specific, fruit. Which is strange because the Medrash, even when it comes to Rabbi Nehemiah's opinion, still keeps the word peiros, that it sustains peiros. Why is Rashi making these distinctions? In the explanation is Rashi is making clear by using this expression what his intention is. And that his intention in his commentary is different to the intention of the Medrash. We've discussed before. As I feel in the Eretah, even in those scenarios where it does not seem like Rashi is giving us anything new and unusual that we hadn't already learned. Now it's matik pirish loshen Chazal, and it sounds like Rashi is just quoting verbatim from Chazal. So the Rebbe has pointed out many times that Rashi's intention is to explain the simplest understanding of the pasuk, which even includes at the level of a 5-year-old learning Chumash for the first time. So even if Rashi is quoting from elsewhere, and even if he's quoting verbatim, you always have to pay attention to the words that Rashi has chosen because they are intentional. We have to understand how they would be interpreted by the 5-year-old learning Chumash. Even if the Medrash uses the same words to imply something else, Rashi's words are specific and they have to fall into the world of Pshat. The same applies here. Even though Rashi is quoting the same things that the Medrash said, but Rashi intends with this to give us the simplest understanding, even though he's using those words. What's the simplest understanding? That means this. When he says that each area makes its produce stand or stable or sustainable, what he means is literally he means it literally like he used the expression lahamid before about having children. In other words, what it means is different areas grow different kinds of produce. Certain areas are good for this, certain areas are good for that. Das heißt, als ein Land ist zugepasst für Gewuchs von die und die Pears. One area is suitable for that kind of fruit. Grapes grow in that kind of environment. Und ein anderes Land für andere Pears. And a different area is better for citrus. That grows in that area. Derech wie mir hat schon früher gelernt. As Mitzrayim is a land was is Megadu Pishton, and we have precedent because the Torah has already illustrated that Mitzrayim is a place that is good for flax to grow. So that's what Rashi is saying. He's not saying that mamid means that it sustains the produce. He's saying that different areas are unique for different produce that they grow. Noch more than that. In Eretz Kanzayim Fshitten Arotzes, you could actually have one territory that has different kinds of land that produce different things. Eretz Goshen, like you have with the Shvatim when they came down to Mitzrayim. They were in the broader place of Mitzrayim, more specifically in the territory of Goshen. And each of these different regions produces its unique produce. Why do I have to know that? Is Rashi Mamshech. Rashi says, you know why you have to know that? Because if you know that this soil is for grapes, and you take some of this soil from this place and you put it with the grapes won't spoil. And if you know that that place is soil that produces citrus, and you take some of that soil and you put it with the citrus, it will prevent the citrus from spoiling. You can work out logically that because different areas of land produce different kinds of produce, it's only logical that there are properties of that soil that are appropriate for that kind of produce. And afar is the afar hamokim umamid es atfur mileirokev. Therefore, it is the soil of that specific place that prevents the spoiling of that particular produce. And that's why he puts the two together. You've got to take it from there and put it into that place. In other words, you have to know which place produces what produce, and then based on that, take the soil of that place and put it with this produce in order that it should not spoil. As it wird verhit von kommt durch hereingeben in ihre Offer, dafke von dem Ort, wo sie wächst. How do you prevent the produce from spoiling? By using soil that comes from its point of origin. So verstandige Pashtus, it's self-understood. That if you're taking soil that's going to prevent spoiling, now it doesn't really make a difference which city you happen to be storing the produce in. Because I could just bring soil from far away and bring it to that city. And if it's the right soil, it will protect the produce. Not like the Medrash that was distinguishing between places and the soil put with it. Rashi's not saying that. Rashi's saying the main thing is you have to know which soil belongs with which produce, and then make sure that soil goes with that produce wherever it goes. That immediately dispels our question. We asked, where does the pasuk indicate that there were two different actions? Making sure the produce is in proximity to where it grew, and making sure that you add some of the soil from that place to the produce. Because the truth is, as far as Rashi is concerned, actually Yosef only did one thing to ensure the sustainability of the produce, which was to make sure that you take some of the soil from the right place and put it with the produce. And that is the point of saying that he took the food from the close by fields and put it into those cities. That what it really means is you want to take produce and the soil that comes with it and put it into the city like that. Mashenkein, Shekol Eretz Veretz Ma'ameretz Periseh Hotkin Shaychas Nitzu Ma'im Milerokev Da Befirish Rashi. But as far as Rashi is concerned, the fact that the environment in which produce grew is helpful for that produce, the environment's not so relevant over here to help prevent the spoiling. The whole concept that the soil of a place protects the produce, that's just an introduction to telling us what Yosef did. What did he do? He made sure to have that produce mixed in together with the soil. And Rashi doesn't have to explain why they chose to store the food in the close by cities. Because that, Rashi says you can understand it from the pshat of the pasuk. The pasuk says Vatas ha'aretz, that the land became divided into these different areas. He says Ketar Gumoy. You want to understand that? Look at what the Unkula says, which is the residents came and they gathered up their food, and they put the food into their cities. It's quite logical, says Rashi. If we're talking about the citizens, residents of a place, gathering up their food, then logically they put the food, obviously, in the place that was closest to them. Ist das nicht, wie sie es manchmal von Pashas l'shen Rabbi Nechem Azafo b'chalal is a davar ma'amit peres kanal sif gimel. But Rashi is also not even saying the same thing as Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia seemed to make a generic statement that having soil together with produce keeps the produce. Now the diak do is ma'afar mokeh. Rashi is saying no, it's not generically that soil keeps produce. It's got to be the soil of the place from which it came. That's what's going to keep it. From the mokum wo die Tfu is gewachsen, I've got to take soil from where this produce grew. On the Tama Dovis Canal, and the reason is because different regions produce their unique fruits and produce, and therefore you need that soil in order to protect that produce. On the meat is and Rashi, and that would explain why Rashi changes the way he says it at the beginning and how he says it afterwards. First, he tells us that every place produces its unique fruit. And then he starts talking about tvur, grain, that you've got to put the soil with the grain in order to sustain the grain. That's because Rashi is first telling us a general principle, which is a general principle that applies to every kind of growth, every kind of produce. That every single place has its unique produce that it makes. On the far nutz Rashi dem Lashon Peres kommen in Prioritz not for. That's why Rashi uses Peres, which applies not only to grains, but to all kinds of things that grow. Could be grains, could be fruits, etc. But then after that, Rashi homes in on what the pasuk here is talking about, which is how they stored the grain so it shouldn't spoil going into the years of famine. Then he speaks about what the Torah is speaking about at that point, which is grain. So in order to protect the grain, they had to take soil and put it with the grain. And that has a lesson for us. The Peres, the Tvur von Eden, is Torah was erlernt. Our Peres, our produce, is the Torah we learn. When a person accumulates a tremendous amount of Torah mitzvahs, which is our grain, then darf wissen sein, es geht der Torah soll beim bleiben. Then you have to make sure, how do I preserve the Torah? Make sure that it doesn't spoil. There's only one thing that will help. You've got to put some sand into the produce. That means that we have to mix into our Torah learning what offer represents, which is dem bitul fun v'nafshik yofla koltiyah. That absolute bittul represented by the line that we say in davening, let my soul be like dust to everybody. On dafka durch them, only when I have that bittul, then the Eibusher, I can ask to open my heart in Torah. So that's the message. The message is, you can only preserve Torah learning with absolute bittul and humility. Rashi is Mosvayiro Ikris, and Rashi adds an incredibly important lesson to that. As does Davzar Me'afar Hamokim. What kind of earth do you use? What kind of soil? What kind of bittul? It's got to be bittul in the same place as where the learning is. Von dem selben Ort, wo die Tfu ist gewachsen. You've got to use the soil from where the produce grew. What does that mean? Wenn ich gehe Soilam, Geishkeit, as kuf an des Chodavi, it's a is adrab dav zayin, ke as cholas shulchan aruch have as kanome begibukari. You have to know that when you're dealing with the world, when you're dealing with secularism, when you're dealing with the Yitzhahara, you cannot be a doormat. But to the contrary, you've got to follow what the Shulchan Aruch says straight up front. You have to be bold as a leopard. That's not a place for offer. That's not a place for bittul. Now, it can trachten, a person could think. Of course, in order to open my heart to Torah, in order for me to be a viable occupier of Torah, of course I have to have bittul. I get that. As I never shall sein ki offer. My soul has to be like dust. And I'm willing to do that. Aber wo ist ein Offer bittul? Nicht mehr an Torah. But a person could say, you know what, I have bittul, but not in the realm of learning Torah. As es kommt zu sein Torah, when you talk about me and my learning, I have to have honor. The Torah scholar, you got to give me honor. When he walks into a celebration, he expects that everybody will stand out of respect for his scholarship. When he gets called up to the Torah, he expects to have the best aliyah. You're going to say, but you've just said in order to learn Torah and master and preserve Torah, you have to have bittul. Where's the bittul? The Torah. He says, I'm going to have offer. It's just not going to come from this place, from the same place of my growth. The Torah says you have to love your fellow Jew. As the Alter Rebbe says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, every single Torah scholar has an obligation to educate other people, even if they're not their children, despite the fact that it says, Vishinantam levonecha. Torah instructs me that I have to spread Torah using my soul, body, and finances. The person says, me? I have bittul. It's not for me. What am I? Who am I? I'm not qualified. I'm not strong enough spiritually to be able to go out there and spread Torah. I am bottle. I am humble. I'm like dust. In the Torah, I need to go to Ashba. If I go out there into the world, maybe it will negatively influence me. So I've got to stay in my very narrow four ames. I'm not even stepping one tefach out of that. I don't even want to get involved in having an influence on my community, on my neighborhood, on my own family. Therefore, we get Rashi's lesson and instruction. As the offer darf sein von dem Mocken wie in Gufa, welchem will abhitten und neusitten. Where do you have to take the soil, the dust from, in order to preserve the produce? It's got to come from the same place as the produce. Es ist nicht genug der Bittel und andere Inyonim. Nur man darf sich halten, ki offer in dem Inyan ha-Torah gufa. It doesn't help for me to have Bittel elsewhere to preserve my Torah. The Bittel has to be in the realm of Torah. Torah is Chachmas shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Torah is Eibishter's wisdom, was is in ganzen Herche von Seichel von Nivra, which is infinitely beyond the grasp of human intellect. And therefore the only way that human intellect or any created intellect can absorb Torah properly, first you have to say the bracha over the Torah. If I learn Torah in such a way that I know properly about the one who gives the Torah, then when I learn Torah, it's going to add to my awe of and love of Hashem. Torah is not just about filling me with intellect. Furthermore, because Torah is Hashem's wisdom, we can understand if you want to be able to contain Hashem's Torah within you, it's actually not going to be sufficient to feel absolute bittul and humility prior to and during learning. No, you've actually got to take some of the soil and put it into the produce itself, which means I've got to plug the bittul into the Torah I've already learned, which might make me feel like I've achieved something and that I should have accolades. I have to remember at all times that the Eibusher gave us his Torah. And the giving of the Torah is ongoing. It is current. If I'm learning Torah now, even if it's one little bit, one word, one letter of Torah, the Eibishter is with me, learning with me. And Torah Torah expects of me that when I'm learning Torah, it's with that same awe and trepidation as if I'm standing at Har Sinai. How's it possible that a person who's half decent, a normal person, could learn Torah with a negative implication, with a malicious intent? Or in order to be able to prop themselves up over somebody else's embarrassment. Or even just simply to take any accolades and honor for Torah. Even if a person is a true Torah giant, surely he remembers. And remembers properly. Whatever I understand about Torah, Torah is infinitely great. It's wider than the seas. It's beyond scratching the surface. And it's not just that it's bigger than any physical measurement. It's in another realm. It's the Eibishter's pleasure. That keeps a person, that preserves a person's Torah, and it can never spoil, God forbid. Besides that, Rashi has another lesson and instruction for us. Yosef hat given the fact that Yosef sustained the entire world during a famine teaches us as Bashas herrscht in Welt a Matze von Hunger beruchnis, that if there's a spiritual famine in the world, a Matze von Amaratzes v'chulei, which means that there's an overwhelming ignorance in the world. Then it's the responsibility of every Jew who is called Yosef spiritually. We've got to go out there and feed the world with spiritual food. It's a responsibility of every one of us. And then Rashi teaches further, it's not just good enough to ensure that we're giving spiritual sustenance to people. We have to gather so much food. We have to make sure that people know you can come in the future. It's always going to be available for you. That means we have to ensure that whatever we're feeding people sustains them. It's a long-term prospect, not just an emergency intervention. We have to make sure that their learning doesn't spoil. We have to ensure that the spiritual welfare that we're sharing with these people, we have to ensure that it lasts. And not only does it last, but for the entire life, and that it becomes a continuum even to their children. That they and their children and generations to come, that the kind of Torah that they learn is the kind of Torah that is prefaced by a bracha that recognizes the Eibishter and the fact that it is his Torah, and that obviously is the most sustainable version of Torah for ourselves and for those we influence.